horse was dying, its breath fading with every second. The cowboy had tried everything until a mysterious Apache woman stepped forward and said softly, "I can save him, but you must promise me one thing." What she asked next would change his life forever. The sun was sinking slowly behind the endless stretch of desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and fading gold. Heat still lingered in the air, but the day's strength was slipping away, just like the life in the horse lying on the dry ground. The cowboy knelt beside him, his hands trembling as they rested on the animal's neck. Dust clung to his clothes, sweat lined his face, and his eyes carried a fear he could not hide. The horse's breathing was uneven, shallow, each breath weaker than the last. It was a sound that cut deeper than any wound. "Easy, boy. I'm right here," he whispered, his voice rough but gentle. This horse was not just an animal to him. He had raised him from a young colt, trained him, ridden across miles of open land with him. They had faced storms, hunger, and long lonely nights together. The horse had never once failed him. And now, when it mattered most, he could do nothing in return. He had tried everything he knew. Water, rest, even the small remedies he had learned over the years. Nothing worked. The wound was worse than he had thought, and time was running out. The cowboy looked around at the empty desert, as if hoping someone might appear out of nowhere. But there was nothing. No sound, no movement, only silence stretching in every direction. His chest tightened as he leaned closer to the horse, pressing his forehead gently against its side. "Don't leave me, not like this," he said quietly. For the first time in years, the cowboy felt truly helpless. The desert had fallen into a deep, uneasy silence. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, as if the land itself was watching. The cowboy remained kneeling, his head lowered, his hand still resting on the horse's neck. He had stopped looking for hope. Then, something shifted. A faint sound of footsteps brushed against the stillness. Soft, steady, unhurried. The cowboy lifted his head sharply and turned. At first, he saw nothing but the fading light and the empty stretch of sand. Then, slowly, a figure began to take shape in the distance, walking toward him. She moved with quiet confidence, as though she belonged to the land in a way he never could. As she drew closer, he could see she was an Apache woman, her presence calm yet powerful. Her dark eyes were fixed on the horse, not on him. He stiffened, unsure whether to speak or reach for the rifle resting nearby. Out here, trust did not come easy. But something about her made him hesitate. She showed no fear, no urgency, only a steady sense of purpose. She stopped a few steps away and looked down at the horse. For a long moment, she said nothing. Her gaze was deep, as if she could see beyond the wound, beyond the pain. The cowboy swallowed, his voice dry. "He's hurt bad," he said, almost defensively. "I've done what I can." The woman slowly knelt beside the horse, her movements gentle and certain. She did not touch it right away. Instead, she studied its breathing, its stillness, its struggle. Then she finally spoke, her voice soft but clear. "This horse is not ready to die." The cowboy stared at her, caught between doubt and a fragile spark of hope he was afraid to feel. The cowboy's eyes fixed on her, searching for any sign that her words were false. But her face remained calm, steady, as if she spoke a simple truth. "What are you saying?" he asked, his voice low, almost afraid of the answer. The woman gently placed her hand near the horse's neck, not quite touching, as if feeling something unseen. "I can save him," she said quietly. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. The cowboy leaned forward, hope rushing in so suddenly it almost hurt. "Then do it," he said quickly. "Please, whatever you need." She did not move. Instead, she lifted her eyes to meet his. "There is something you must promise first." His breath caught. The urgency in his chest turned into tension. "Anything," he replied without thinking. She shook her head slowly. "Do not speak before you understand." Her words settled heavily between them. The cowboy hesitated now, his earlier desperation giving way to caution. "What kind of promise?" he asked. The woman glanced back at the horse, then returned her gaze to him. "If I save him, you must let him go when the time comes. You must not hold him for your own need. His life does not belong to you." The cowboy froze. The words struck him harder than he expected. Let him go. After everything they had been through. This horse was more than a companion. He was family. That's not right, he said, shaking his head. He's mine. I raised him. The woman's expression did not change. You care for him, she said softly. But that does not mean you own his spirit. Silence filled the space again. The cowboy looked down at the horse, its breathing weaker now, slipping further away. And for the first time, he was no longer sure what anything truly meant. The cowboy's hand tightened slightly against the horse's neck, as if he could hold him here by sheer will. The woman's words echoed in his mind, refusing to fade. You must let him go. He stared at the animal lying before him, his chest rising and falling in weak, uneven breaths. This was not just a horse. This was years of trust, of silent understanding. He remembered the first time he saw him, a restless young colt with fire in his eyes. No one else could calm him, but somehow he had. From that day on, they had belonged together. Through long rides under the burning sun, through nights when the cold cut deep into the bones, the horse had carried him without fail. When others turned away, the horse had stayed. When the world felt empty, the horse had been enough. And now he was being asked to give that up. The cowboy swallowed hard, his throat dry. You're asking me to save him, just to lose him later, he said quietly, not looking at the woman. I am asking you to see him for what he is, she replied. Not what you want him to be. Her voice was calm, but it stirred something restless inside him. He shook his head, frustration rising. You don't understand. Out here, a man needs his horse. He's not just something I can walk away from. The woman said nothing this time. That silence pressed heavier than any argument. The cowboy looked down again, and this time the memories came faster. The close calls. The narrow escapes. The way the horse would stop without being told, as if sensing danger before he could. This animal had saved his life more than once. And what had he given in return? Food. Shelter. Commands. A slow, uncomfortable thought began to take shape. Had he ever truly asked what the horse needed? His chest tightened as he watched the faint movement of the animal's side. Each breath seemed like a question he could not answer. If he refused, the horse would die here, in the dust, under his watch. If he agreed, he might save him, only to face the pain of letting him go someday. The cowboy closed his eyes for a moment, torn between love and fear, between holding on and doing what was right. For the first time, he began to wonder if loving something meant knowing when not to keep it. The cowboy opened his eyes slowly, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The desert felt quieter than ever, as if the world itself was waiting for his answer. He looked at the horse again. Its strength was fading, its body no longer fighting the way it once had. The bond they shared was still there, but it was no longer enough to save him. His jaw tightened. For years, he had believed that holding on was a sign of loyalty, that never letting go meant you truly cared. But now, that belief felt uncertain, like something slipping through his grasp. He let out a long, unsteady breath. If I say no, he began, his voice low, he dies here. The woman did not respond, but her silence confirmed what he already knew. And if I say yes, he continued, glancing at her, he lives, but not the way I want. He lives the way he is meant to, she said gently. The words settled deep within him. The cowboy looked back at the horse, his eyes softening. Slowly, he moved his hand along its neck, a quiet gesture of comfort, of apology, of love. He realized then that this moment was not about what he wanted. It was about what the horse needed. His throat tightened, but this time he did not fight it. All right, he said finally, his voice steady despite the emotion behind it. I give you my word. The air seemed to shift as the promise left his lips. The woman studied him for a brief moment, as if weighing the truth of his decision. Then she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Trust had been given. And there was no turning back now. The woman moved closer to the horse, her presence calm and certain. She knelt beside it and finally placed her hands gently along its neck and side. Her touch was light, yet filled with purpose. From a small pouch at her side, she took out crushed herbs and held them in her palm. A faint, earthy scent rose into the air as she pressed them softly against the wound. Her lips began to move in quiet words, a low rhythm that seemed to blend with the stillness of the desert. The cowboy watched in silence, unsure of what he was witnessing. There was no rush in her movements, no panic. Only patience, as if she trusted something deeper than time itself. The wind stirred slightly, carrying her voice across the open land. The horse's breathing, once weak and uneven, began to slow and steady. Its body, tense with pain, eased under her touch. The cowboy leaned closer, hardly daring to believe it. The change was small, but it was real. For the first time since the fall, hope did not feel like a lie. He stayed still, afraid that even the slightest movement might break whatever fragile miracle was beginning to unfold. The horse's side rose and fell more steadily now, each breath clearer than before. The cowboy could hardly believe what he saw. The shallow, trembling gasps had been replaced with a slow, even rhythm. A warmth returned to the animal's eyes. A spark he had feared was lost forever. Tears pricked the cowboy's eyes as he reached out to brush the horse's mane. "Is it really?" he whispered, his voice trembling with disbelief. The horse lifted its head slightly, turning toward him, its gaze steady and trusting. The Apache woman watched quietly, her hand still hovering over the animal as if guiding it back to life. There was no magic in the way most men would call it, only a careful balance of patience, skill, and respect. Yet to the cowboy, it felt as though the desert itself had bent to her will. Slowly, the horse pushed itself up on shaking legs. The cowboy held his breath, unsure if the movement would collapse into weakness. But the horse steadied, shifting its weight, testing its strength, and then, with a soft snort, it stood fully upright. The cowboy could hardly contain himself. He dropped to his knees beside it, his hands running along its flanks, his face pressed against the warm fur. "You made it," he murmured, his voice breaking. "You really made it." The woman finally smiled, a quiet, knowing expression. She stepped back, giving space for the reunion, her eyes soft but firm. The cowboy looked at her, gratitude and awe filling him. The desert was silent once more, but it felt different now. The life that had teetered on the edge was restored. The horse stood strong, the cowboy's heart full, and in that moment, the impossible felt real. The cowboy sat back on his heels, still holding the horse's mane, his chest heaving from relief and wonder. The Apache woman remained a few steps away, watching him quietly. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, he asked, Why that condition? Why make me promise to let him go?" His voice carried both confusion and a hint of accusation. She walked slowly toward him, her eyes calm but unwavering. "Because life is not ours to hold," she said softly. "We cannot decide the length of another's journey. Only when we learn to let go can we truly protect what we love." The cowboy shook his head, still trying to make sense of her words. "But he's mine. I raised him, cared for him, survived with him. How can I just let him go?" She knelt beside him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Ownership is an illusion. Love is responsibility, yes, but it is also respect. Respect for life, for freedom, for the path that belongs to another. You asked me to save him, and I did. But now, to honor that life, you must honor his right to live fully not only for you, but for him." The cowboy looked at the horse, now standing steady and alert, and something shifted inside him. He realized that the bond he shared with the horse had never been about possession. It had always been about trust, loyalty, and care. He felt a quiet understanding settle over him. The promise was not a punishment or a test, it was a lesson. One that reached deeper than fear, deeper than attachment. Slowly, he nodded. "I understand," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "I'll honor it, whatever comes." The woman's lips curved in a faint smile. She had given him more than guidance. She had opened his heart to a truth he had never known. The cowboy stood a little straighter now, the weight in his chest lighter than it had been in years. Watching the horse move freely across the desert, he felt something stir deep inside, a quiet understanding of what it meant to truly care. He remembered the fear and desperation he had carried, the insistence that holding on was proof of love. Now he saw that love was not about possession. It was about trust, patience, and respect. The lessons he had resisted now felt clear, etched into his heart. Over the following days, he began to change in ways small but steady. He tended to the land with more care, thinking of balance and life beyond himself. He offered help to travelers and neighbors without expectation. He spoke less in anger and more in thoughtfulness. And always, he watched the horse with admiration rather than ownership, learning to celebrate its spirit instead of clinging to it. The cowboy had survived many hardships before, but none had shaped him like this. Letting go had not weakened him, it had strengthened him. It had opened a part of his heart he had never known, and in that quiet transformation, he found peace and understanding that some of the truest bonds are measured not by possession, but by the freedom to love without holding. The sun had begun its slow climb above the horizon, casting a soft, golden light across the desert. The cowboy stood at the edge of a small ridge, his eyes following the horse as it moved with grace and strength across the open land. Each step was sure and free, its spirit untamed yet alive. A deep sense of peace settled over him, replacing the tension and fear that had gripped him only days before. The Apache woman appeared at the edge of the ridge, her figure framed by the rising sun. She watched silently, her presence calm and unwavering. The cowboy turned toward her, offering a nod of respect and gratitude. She returned it with a small smile, a quiet acknowledgment of the trust and understanding that had passed between them. He took a deep breath, feeling the cool morning air fill his lungs. The desert was alive with sound, birds calling, wind brushing against the sparse shrubs, the distant rush of water over rocks in a hidden stream. For the first time in years, the cowboy felt truly present, fully connected to the world around him. He stepped forward, and the horse turned its head as if sensing him. Their eyes met, and in that quiet exchange, no words were necessary. He understood now that love was not measured by possession or control, but by care, respect, and the willingness to let life unfold as it was meant to. The woman finally spoke, her voice soft and certain. "Remember what you have learned. Honor it in every choice you make." The cowboy nodded once more, his heart full. "I will," he said. The horse snorted gently, shaking its mane, and then turned to move across the desert once more. The cowboy followed, walking beside it instead of ahead, feeling the weight of his old self lift with each step. As they disappeared over the ridge together, the Apache woman watched for a long moment before turning and walking away into the desert. The world seemed wider, softer, and more alive than it had before. And in that quiet, sunlit morning, the cowboy understood something he would carry for the rest of his life. Some bonds are strongest when we hold them lightly, and some lessons last forever. The desert stretched endlessly before him, but he no longer feared its emptiness. It was full of life, full of promise, and full of freedom.